Well, it's obviously not the greatest scenario to have you back in. I mean, as a military man yourself, how do you feel about the whole Afghanistan debacle, fiasco, cluster? Well, how do you feel about
leaving Afghanistan?
Leaving Afghanistan.
We're still there.
Oh, we are still there.
Yeah, we have at least 10,000 American citizens who are being held hostage, and what did the president say? 55, 60,000 friends of Afghanis that have helped us over the years. So it's really hard to watch, to see that people are actually being murdered and raped and killed based on a decision that was hard to imagine. That the decision was based on a time, a date on a calendar. Well, we want to get everybody out before the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and therefore we can make some political points.
If political points was the goal, that's backfired.
Yeah, exactly. That's really what's even more devastating about it, is that I think the decision to do this was based on a political time, to give them this benefit of saying they did something. And it's completely backfired. And the result of it is literally people are being murdered and killed and raped and hunted down. And people that have never known the Taliban, people that are less than 20 years old, maybe you're only 25 years old even, and you weren't even alive when they were running things, and you've known freedom and openness for your whole life. And all of a sudden now you're running for your life. It's dramatic. And to think that this was done by so-called the experts in foreign policy, that we're going to, restore America's foreign policy credibility after the last administration, which was accused of being so inept. It's just really shocking.
Well, Jim, you focus a lot on, the murder and the rape and the hunting people down. But China says it's looking forward to, friendly relations with the Taliban, and the Taliban creating an open and inclusive society.
Yeah, it's amazing the amount of, if I went back through my list of emails in the Red Star Rising before this show, and was just kind of scanning through and looking for articles about the Chinese talking about Afghanistan, and it's clear that Chinese Communist Party, the Foreign Minister Wang Yi, they had been working this before this debacle. They had been meeting with the Taliban in China and talking with them and laying the seeds for how they could come in and portray themselves as a mediator, and that they're going to, hold the Taliban to give up their violent ways, but see them as potentially a legitimate representative of the people of Afghanistan. And it's just sickening, because it was all laid out there for us to see, China's maneuvering and activity behind the scenes. And I guess we just didn't care about that.
It's crazy to me. Like, you hear the Chinese Communist Party talking about working with the Taliban. At the same time, they're talking about going after terrorists in Hong Kong, students and teachers. It's
right.
Bizarro.
And they sure that in their pronouncements, Xingjiang, they said, we want to work with the Taliban. We can help negotiate these things, and they have to give up their violent ways, and they also have to disassociate themselves from ETIM, and because we're going to go after them and wipe them out in Western China. But it's just amazing that the amount of maneuvering that the PRC's already done in this arena, while we appear to be completely flat-footed or just cutting and running.
You mentioned, Jim, the ETIM, so it's East Turkistan Independence Movement.
Islamic.
Or sorry.
East Turkistan Islamic
Movement. What is that, Jim? And how do you see the Chinese Communist Party potentially working with the Taliban to go after that group?
Oh, this is the Uyghurs out in Western China, the people that have, kind of said we want to be separate and have kind of our ethnic identity, and the Chinese government has said, no, you're a terrorist organization, and you're part of the, I forget, they have a list of the things that they're against, and terrorism and extremism. This group has been identified as that, and so we've watched them put Uyghurs in concentration camps, and we've watched them gather them up, and we don't know exactly everything that they've done, but from the stories that we hear, that they're murdering and raping there as well. And so now they've got to deal with the government, an emerging potential government of Afghanistan, run by a Taliban organization that may or may not have similar views to the people of Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. It probably don't have the same, but I mean, are considered. You could understand that the Chinese Communist Party could look at the Taliban and say, well, you're an extremist organization, but they're willing to work with them to go after and help them exterminate the Uyghurs, separatists that they think are inside China. So what they'll probably do is tell the Taliban, hey, we'll leave you alone. We won't come in and bother you as long as you make sure that anybody that comes out of China that's Uyghur that tries to set up camp in your neighborhoods, that you turn them over to us or exterminate them and show us proof of that.
It's crazy to me that, China is committing genocide on Muslims, and yet it's trying to work with the Taliban. And frankly, no other Muslim-majority country seems to be all that concerned with the Muslim genocide in China.
Right. It's amazing. I mean, some would argue maybe that the Taliban, yes, they follow a Sharia. What vein of the Muslim culture and the Muslim religion are they? I mean, it's a very extreme one. So I'm sure that the Chinese will be able to somehow differentiate that and divide that up and salami slice it to be able to make some kind of political agreement. And they've already said over and over again, if the Taliban gives up its terroristic ways, then we'll be able to work with them. And so far, the Taliban spokespeople have all been on cue to make sure that they say the right things, similar to what they said back right after 9/11. But this time they've got 20 years of experience using, social media and the internet and things of that nature. So I'm sure they're going to be much more sophisticated in how they portray themselves, at least until they get what they want, which is to get the Americans out first and foremost.
Oh, man, I want to go back to ETIM for a second, because there is some independent research that shows that this group might actually not even exist anymore. But it is the primary group that the Chinese Communist Party uses as a boogeyman, basically, to talk about terrorism in Xinjiang.
And that's what they use to lock up literally 10% of the Uyghurs in concentration camps.
It's a complicated story because there was this group of Uyghurs who traveled to Afghanistan in the mid-90s, and they were kind of like a small independence movement kind of thing, but they were not violent jihadists. And they tried to get support from the Taliban, and nobody really cared about their cause, essentially. And they the original group petered out in the mid-2000s when the leader of that group died. And he had actually even called Radio Free Asia after the September 11th attacks to denounce them and say, we're not working with the Taliban, we're not working with Al-Qaeda. And it was interesting because the Chinese Communist Party essentially used this group, and this was the group they got put on the terror list by the George W. Bush administration. In order to get China to support the war on terror, the CCP was like, okay, but you have to add this Uyghur group to your terrorist list. And at first, the Bush administration actually wasn't happy with what the Chinese Communist Party was doing, because they essentially, I think even President Bush said something about how the war on terror shouldn't be used by the Chinese to go after their own ethnic minorities. And then when they were trying to get, right before the U.S. invaded Iraq, they kind of made a turn and actually put ETIM on this terrorist list.
I feel like this is a lesson for what happens when you say, we have to work with China to tackle blank.
Mm-hmm. And then they find a way to manipulate it towards their own means. And essentially what the Chinese Communist Party has done is that they have come up with this list of so-called hundreds of quote-unquote terrorist activities. And in the 80s and 90s, there were some bus bombings in Xinjiang. There were some violent acts. But the most of the things on their list are things like knife attacks that we've done episodes on that we know happens in other parts of China. It's not something that's, there's not really a jihadist movement. There's not really any kind of like organized terrorism movement in Xinjiang at all. They're just using this to genocide the Uyghurs. But, we kind of fell for it until last year Pompeo actually removed ETIM from the terrorist list.
Oh, Matt, I think it's funny what you said. Like, oh, yeah, we have to work with China. Yeah, we have to work with China on the war on terror. And now they're supporting the Taliban. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it took 20 years.
It took 20 years. Well, so, Jim, this is the big question. A few weeks before this all went down, China met with Taliban officials. What do you think they talked about? What do you think? Did China have a role in what happened in Afghanistan? What was that meeting about?
I think it was China seeing knowing that the United States, this administration, and the previous administration, and the previous had said they wanted to get out. And now we had kind of this firmer timetable that the Biden administration had put out there of a time. The exact thing I think that President Trump had said when he was president is you don't tell your adversaries when you're going to do something to allow them to maneuver and take advantage of you. So
didn't he set a deadline for American withdrawal?
Yeah, they had said that it was September 11th is what they wanted to.
The Trump administration had said, I believe, May 1st, 2021.
But they said that it was on conditions and that they had already delayed it back a few times over the course of that year. And so in this case, what I think the Chinese knew was that there was a larger framework of a timeline that America was committed to leaving. So in a strategic sense, it didn't matter what day it was in the calendar. They knew that both the Republican and Democrat administration were committed to this because the American people, I think most polls had said, majority of American people, great majority, wanted us to get out after 20 years. So China knew that. And so they had been laying the seeds with these kinds of discussions. And then I think when the Biden administration came out and said, hey, we're going to have everybody out by September 11th, I think the Chinese took advantage of that in the sense that they brought the Taliban to China and said, hey, how can we make this advantageous to you? How can we help you get recognition as the new legitimate government of Afghanistan with this probably sub-hidden thing of, oh, by the way, if we help you, you got to do this for us. And what's that laundry list of things that China gave to the Taliban? It's not just help with ETIM. I'm sure it's also some kind of arrangement for access to these rare earth elements and minerals and lithium and things of that nature. I'm sure that's on there. How that plays out in the next year or two is going to be interesting to watch.